Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving problems. And you know what? When you talk about making an impact, there is no better way than getting people's voices out to more people. You're enabling impacts. And today we've got Tom Schwab, Navy veteran, joining us, and we're going to talk just about that. How you doing, Tom?
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Good, man. I'm excited. I'm excited to have you on here because the impact thing is, I think people blow it off until they hit a point in life, and it's unfortunate, man. If I'd learned the impact I was making when I was younger, that and creating that legacy, even as a young 20-year-old lieutenant, the legacy that I created then, didn't even realize it. How did and this is my roundabout way to getting to the interview Valet, because I'm really interested in that and how that is enabling your clients, your customers, to make a more of an impact. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and I really think it comes to this idea that we're all one conversation away, right? There's a thing in marketing now, you're one funnel away. It's really good marketing, it's a good slogan, but to me it's not true, right? The best things in my life have always come through a conversation. And as I look back at, my best customers, my best partners, my best team members, they all came from conversations, right? My bride did not come through a funnel, right? It came from a conversation, a personal introduction from a friend. And so I think we need to focus more on powerful conversations, not just for what it can do for our life, but like you said, Otis, what it can do for other people to make that impact. And, in years past, right, I would say, well, here I am in rural Southwest Michigan, right? How am I going to make an impact from here, right? Mm-hmm. But with technology today, right, you can always reach people. Prime examples: a podcast guest, a podcast host. And one of the things that I learned in the military that has been a huge theme in my life is what's ordinary to you is amazing to other people, right? So we always undervalue what we know and overvalue what other people know. The person that knows fourth grade math is a god to the person that's trying to figure out second grade math. So no matter where you are in life, you can help people, you can have that impact.
Yeah, that's so true. And it follows into there's that Tucson delay, Camden. It follows into that something I didn't think about it. I didn't really coin it or put it into a phrase until a little over a year ago. And that's the fact that you're being a selfish SOB if you're not sharing what you know. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It is we've got all this experience and knowledge, and why would you keep it? I mean, it's not like a savings account that I'm going to leave behind for Camden when I'm dead, because you know what, all that stuff up there is gone as soon as I'm dead. It don't go in a bank.
Yeah.
We need to talk about that savings account, by the way, Dad. Tom, what I was going to ask is, what do you think sets podcasting apart as a medium? I think that, especially when you compare it to like old school TV, like news, those type of things, you can see how it's longer format. But then I think there's an interesting thing where we've all observed that for a while now, and it's still the only place you can get the conversation. So what do you think sets it apart so much as a medium for that, impact-driven conversation?
I think it's the realness of it, the authenticity. It's not super edited. You can have real conversations. And I remember there's a client came to us recently, and I'm like, well, why do you want to do podcast interviews? And this guy's a high-level consultant, and I loved his answer. He paused and he goes, because I think most of digital marketing today is the digital equivalent of advertising above a urinal. And I had to pause, and I'm like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, they say you're supposed to be everywhere, right? And he's like, if my clients saw me, the first time they saw me was on social media, or I'm there doing a dance on TikTok or something, he's like, that's a reason for them not to hire me. It's almost like, if you're looking for the best restaurant in town, you're looking for the best cardiac surgeon, the best defense attorney, right? Are you gonna hire the one or go to the one that's like on the park bench or the bus or above the urinal? No, you're probably going to get it from a referral or because you heard about it. So I think, going back to that one funnel away, if you're trying to sell $5 widgets, there's a place for that, on digital marketing. But if you're really trying to sell a higher value, a higher relationship, to set yourself apart, well, it takes I believe it takes a conversation on that.
So I'm always curious about life on a submarine, and folks, if you did miss the intro, he is a Navy vet, and you spent some time on some of our most valuable national defense assets. And I'm always, because, I couldn't stand being in a tank, and I could get out of the tank and not have to worry about water coming in. I couldn't handle that. How did that shape your young life and being in that container like that for months on end?
All right. This is a weird answer, but it forced me not to go in the submarine force. So I had to be on a sub between my sophomore and junior year at the academy, and that 4 days was the longest month of my life. I hated being on a submarine. So when I graduated, the old needs of the Navy, they needed nukes, and I'm like, I'll do nuclear power, but I'm doing it on an aircraft carrier. So a lot more space. So I was a nuke, but I was a surface nuke. And it was interesting, and that's really where I got that idea of what's ordinary to you is amazing to other people. Because you could always tell somebody that was new on the ship. Because they would climb up all the ladders, and there was this place called Vulture's Row, where you'd watch the planes take off and land. And the first 3 or 4 days on board, you'd see everybody walking up there to do it. And then after a while, you're like, that's a long walk, right? And the longer you stayed on there, it's like a nuke. We were down below the water line. For us, going topside meant going to the elevator or the hangar bay so you could look out the elevator door and see the sun. That's far enough. I don't need to go up there, right? And so, but what nuclear power taught me more than anything, Otis, and I'm sure you saw this too, is in business, I'm so amazed when either I say it or somebody else says it, that like, oh, you don't understand. My business is so complicated that I could never teach it. I could never systematize it. And I just have to start banging my head against the wall when I think that about my business. Because right now, in the Navy, there's nuclear power, people running nuclear power plants. They're running it safe, running it effectively. The average age is 21, and most of them are high school educated. Highly brilliant people, right? Great training, great culture, but this idea of that to do my business, I've got to find people that are just like me. Or, to run a nuclear power plant, I need to have PhDs in nuclear physics. It's like it doesn't scale well, right? So that was a long answer to a short question of why I did not want to go on a sub.
Well, I can empathize right there with you. Like I said, I mean, a tank was bad enough for me. The one or two times I went on a sub, and I was like, dang, I don't know how you guys do that. So yeah.
Yep, there's a question that we usually comes to mind when we talk with people who are in the Air Force or commercial pilots. And it's about the perspective being so high up. But I just started thinking, Tom, you've got an interesting perspective just being out in the middle of the ocean like that. How does that shape your worldview in a way of just being out there looking around at the horizon and there ain't nothing there? How did that change the way you view the world?
That's a great question. I guess there's two things I would ask on that, right? Or would respond to that. The hardest job or the hardest class I ever had to take in college was swimming, right? I had to take 4 years of swimming, and I am an aqua rock, and I never understood it, right? Why do I have to be able to swim 2 miles, right? Navy ships are not that close. If I can swim 2 miles or 20 feet, I'm still just as far from shore. But what it did show me is just how big the world is. So I grew up in a small town in the suburbs of Chicago, right? It was like Mayberry. But I was never more than 100 miles away from my hometown. So my world was really small. And then by the grace of God and a technical error, I got into the Navy, right? I wasn't physically qualified. Seriously, I have monoscopic vision. I can't see 3D. But they didn't figure that out till my senior year. So I got to see the entire world. My world changed from when I was 17 to 18. 17, I'd never been on a plane, never been anywhere other than like 100 miles from my hometown. A year later, I'd been around the world, met people that saw the world differently than me. And it was just opened my eyes. It made me so much more curious, and that's one of the things I loved about being in the military. And so when I got out, I intentionally said, I've got to keep traveling. I've got to keep experiencing different cultures. And I think that's really why I love doing podcasting and meeting, people online, right? Because even though I live in, rural Southwest Michigan, right? I live on 6.5 acres. I have 2 miniature donkeys. But, this morning I talked with somebody from Australia. So it's really, there's a lot of problems in the world today, but there's no better time to be alive. And I think the world is a big, big place. And you start to understand that when you're in the middle of a body of water and you realize you're this little speck in a big ocean. I mean, heck, you can go to the middle of Lake Michigan and feel that. And then you realize Lake Michigan's small compared to the Indian Ocean.
Oh, yeah. I just keep picturing how it must feel because you get out there and you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And then you start thinking, okay, wait, we've been moving how fast for how many days and I still don't see anything? And how it just keeps, the perspective just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. How do you think that's influenced your approach to business as far as trying to make those connections and that type of thing?
Man, you're asking great questions. It's really causing me to. This is like therapy. I think it. I really think it changes your idea of what's possible. Right? When you start to look at how many people are in the world, how big the world is. I remember being in New York City just before COVID and everything, and standing up on one of the buildings and looking out and thinking, like, how many potential customers can I see right now, right? For my business, heck, I could probably see 100,000 potential customers right there, right? Mm-hmm. And we serve a couple hundred at any one time. And that's just what I can see from the whatever it is, the 50 stories up. And then you start to think about the entire world, right? Your business, you are just scratching the surface of it, right? Of what you could do. And, when Otis, you talked about impact, right? You don't have to be Apple or Google or whatever to have impact. But even there, you look at it and say, what more impact could they have? In the next 5 years when twice as many people come online, what impact are they going to have? How much bigger is the world going to be for us? So yeah, I think sometimes just going to the same restaurants in the same place, I can look and say, wow, I'm doing pretty well. I'm making a pretty big impact. But then you get in the middle of a big city or a big ocean, and you're just like, I am not even a ripple that anybody sees in here.
No, that's so true, and you just brought back a memory for me. Not in the ocean sense, although I did a little bit of that playing around, but not like big blue and underway or big gray and underway. I was thinking of summiting a few mountains and you're looking out and you're seeing all the mountain ranges going forward as far as the eye can see is nothing but mountains in various parts of the world, and how amazing that is, and how that just changes your perspective from the I'm just here, but I can still make a wave, and I think that's the thing I think that makes the difference in all of us, is we have the opportunity to cause that butterfly effect, that ripple in the water, to stay in our Navy terms. What happened that, because I mean, Navy, like every service, you're a part of a team, you're a part of a bureaucracy. You get out of the Navy, you get into corporate world, but then all of a sudden you're like, nope, I want to do my own thing. What caused that? I want to do my own thing. I want to be the big E, an entrepreneur.
I don't know that I have ever said, "Oh, I want to be an entrepreneur," right? To me, it's a meaningless word, right? Because Richard Branson's an entrepreneur, so is a nephew with a new idea and no execution, right? They're both entrepreneurs. I always looked at it as more, I want to build something. I want to help people. I see myself more as like my grandfather was as a business owner, right? And I think as I look back on it, maybe I was more of an entrepreneurial spirit, but I always wanted to go for the safe route, right? So my dad, God rest his soul, he loved me. He tried to do the best for me and all the rest. But I remember when I got out of the Navy, he sat me down and he said, "You're a fool." And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "All you got to do is put in another 15 years, you get a retirement, all the rest of this." And, I was trying to explain to him, "Dad, I love what I did, but I don't think my family can survive another deployment," right? When somebody says, "Thank you for your service," I'm like, I had fun, right? Thank the families and the dependents. They're the ones that really have to deal with it. So, then I went in to work for a Fortune 500 company, and I felt like I was in a submarine there, right? Because I felt so trapped in a building. I mean, we didn't even get port calls. The ship never moved. And so after a year and a half with that, I took a straight commission job in medical sales. And at that time, my dad called me a dang fool, or words to that effect, right? He's like, "You cannot do this, right? You're married, you got a mortgage, you got a kids." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I believe I can do this." Now, he lived long enough to say, "You made the right decision," right? But for me, it was always, I want to keep growing. I want to keep learning. I want to control my fate more, right? I'm not the best at following rules, right? My wife is a rule follower. I follow the guidelines, right? And so I think I was always on that more entrepreneurial, creative aspect of it. And so for me, it was more of an evolution, right? I sold, then I had a distributorship, and I thought, "Oh, I've got my own business." And what it was I had, one supplier. So while I wasn't a W-2 employee, I still worked for someone. So when I ended up selling that back and had a sideline business, I think that was my first, more of the entrepreneurial side of that. And so I think it's more of an evolution, and I think the world is changing too, where there's more opportunity. You don't have to put 20 or 30 years in a company to get that success. And if anything, you look at even my counterparts now that got out after 20 or 30 years, they've got a second career, right, that they're doing. So I think as we live longer, why not just keep evolving into doing different things, and not revolutionary things, but just evolutionary of what we learned and then how we can apply it today.
How do you create that consistency? Because you talking about your time in the Navy, you talked about the self-awareness of the impact on your family and those type of things. Entrepreneurship, it looks different, but you could put yourself in that same bucket again of, constantly working, constantly going out, trying to make things better. And even though same type of thing, you had that perspective of, well, I'm doing it all for the family, you still need that consistency, you still need the home, all those kind of things. How did you find that balance? Or was that something that took some time as you're going through it?
I didn't find the balance early on, right? It was all or nothing. It took its toll at times, right? I think an entrepreneur alone, or even a business owner alone, is a business owner at risk, right? You need a peer group around you, and I found that people that sign the front of the check see the world or understand the world differently than the people that sign the back of the check, and vice versa, right? And the world needs both of those. And so as you go through those struggles, you need a peer group of people like you to help you through the low times, and also to knock you down a rung at the high times, to realize that, no, it's not all you on either ends of that. So that really, really helped me, having those peer groups around of other men that had similar values or were going through different things. And it's not that they were all at the same place, right, the same age or anything like that, because those different viewpoints really helped. I love our team is all remote right now, right? Not everybody wants to live in Kalamazoo, Michigan. But
What?
Yeah, right? So that's where the world headquarters are. Now we've got 30 team members in Europe and North America. About 60% of them are military spouses. But I love the remote work, but isolation is also it's cruel and unusual punishment in most places, right? But yet we do it to ourselves, right? I'll just isolate myself in the office, work harder, and it doesn't work. And I don't know if that I consider it work-life balance. As I think of that, it sets me up for failure. I want work-life integration, right? And I can think of a great uncle I had. Uncle Doug was a cow farmer. He had no work-life balance, right? Christmas, Easter, whatever it was, the cows didn't care. They still needed to be milked at a certain time. But he had this work-life integration where, he had time off between milkings where he could be there for his kids and do fun stuff and things like that. So I try looking at that, not so much work-life balance, but work-life integration, right? Wednesdays we call best day ever. I kick off early. My bride and I go to pick up the grandkids, and I switch from my entrepreneur hat to my pa hat, and then I get to go out and play there. So I don't know that if I had perfect work-life balance and worked from 8 to 5 every day, that I would have that. So I strive for work-life integration.
I want to jump all over this because we talk about the same thing, but we just say it's all life. There's no integration. Yeah. It's all life. But when you start talking about milking the cows, I gotta let Camden jump in on that because he spent some time learning some lessons about how friendly dairy cattle can be.
Oh, they're very friendly. It's the bull you got to watch out for. I had my fair share of run-ins, but I think the perspective I always talk about from the farm, working with my Uncle Ben, is that there's always something to do on the farm. But the challenge then becomes when are you going to do that something? Because there's so many things to do. There's always another project. There's always an animal you need to look after or go check in on, or, fence that needs repairing. There's always something. And so you really have to start analyzing all of those different things of, hey, do I need to do this now? Can this wait till tomorrow? And I think that perspective is so useful when you talk life management, because the easy option is to dive in on something for 3 months and then put it away and then go dive in on another thing for 3 months. Spend 3 months with my family, then go spend 3 months coaching rugby, and then go spend 3 months building a business, and just going through the cycle like that. That would make things simple, but that's just not how life works. You have all of these things that are happening at the exact same time. I'm at the point where in playoffs here for rugby at U of A, I'm all over the place right now because I've got rugby, I've got business, we're buying a house, all these different things. But as I've had a great coach, Otis, remind me before, if I was just doing one of those things, I'd drive myself crazy. It's having all of those different pieces, because those are all the different pieces of your life. And I think it's that you just have to have that awareness of, okay, yeah, there's so many things that can be done. Yeah, there's so many things that I want to do, but it's when are you going to do them? When do they really need to be done? Because there's so much time. You've got to be particular about when you're using it.
Yeah, and there's different seasons in life too. Buddy of mine from the academy, Chris Hodges, wrote a book. I love it. It's a parable called Placing Stones. And he's like, if you think of stones as time, we can place them wherever we want, but there's different times where you can place stones, right? So when you've got young children, they're only going to be young for a little bit of a time, right? So it's important to set that foundation there, right? When now my kids are out of the house, it's not like I'm going to say, well, I'm going to drive them to school and do all the rest of that. No, that's past. If you want to be an Olympic athlete, there's a certain time in a season that you have to do that. I can't say, well, now I'm going to retire early and I'm going to become an Olympic athlete in my 50s. No, that time was probably more in your 20s. So I think there's different seasons for that too, and to realize what season you're in and put the priority there, right? Because if you don't put the priority, you're going to have consequences later.
Episode of the Cam and Otis Show. If you're enjoying this conversation, then make sure to share it with other lifelong learners in your life so they can enjoy it too. Stay up to date with the show on Facebook and Instagram at Cam and Otis Show, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you're the first to hear about new episodes and other special content. Now let's get back to this.
How did you come up with the shift though? Because folks out there in radio land, just so you know, Tom's in the same kind of age demographic that I am. How did you come up with a shift to do a business into such a one of those realms and industries that is like almost like we used to say about the internet, 20 years ago? It's like, that'll never catch on. And you've done that with podcasting as a business and getting, matching guests and shows and things like that. And at the time when we were all going, how do you spell podcast? You jumped into it pretty early. How did that risk acceptance come to be?
There was a phrase or a joke we used to use in the Navy. You have to be smart enough to know what right answer when told. And so that's how it came about. So my previous business had been built up, and I sold it off using inbound marketing, right? Using guest blogs. 20 years ago, that's the way you built up a digital marketing. Post on somebody else's website, you get that exposure, you get the backlinks, all the rest of that. So built a company up that way, sold it off, and then I started to think, as I had some buddies said, hey, can you help me with this? I thought, I bet you could use podcast interviews the same way we used to use guest blogs, right? And I'm not a writer. For me, a blog is a homework assignment. Talking is easy. So I'm like, I bet you could do this and do sort of guest blog on podcasts. And so we started to test it out in 2014, 2015, and it worked great, right? And I was in a sabbatical period, and some people were asking, well, how do you do this? I wrote a cheesy little PDF that I kept giving away to people, right? And then I had some friends that I was in a mastermind with are like, you should do a course on this. So I did a cheesy little course, kept doubling the price every 2 weeks, and whatever feedback I got, I would put it in to continually improve the course. Never took it out of beta. And honestly, I couldn't, because it was like people weren't using it, right? And I would ask them, and the people that were honest were the ones that came to me and said, I understand what you're trying to teach me, but, I just want to be the guest. You take care of all the rest. And I was like, oh, that's good copy. And they're like, you got to do this,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
So I beta tested it for 6 months to prove to them that it wouldn't work. I had 2 people working on it with me, and it worked really, really well. I mean, to the point where Interview Valet came from one of our clients. Matt Miller's a Air Force Academy graduate. He thought of the name, gave it to me, bought the domain, and said, if you like it, here, I'll give you the domain for it, right? You have to do this. So we launched in 2016 this agency that works with thought leaders, right? Nonfiction authors, coaches, consultants, brands, to help them leverage targeted podcast interviews to get their brand and their message out there. For the first 3 years, I was like, oh, we are way, way too early, right? Because I'd give my little elevator pitch, and people would go, what's a podcast? But then about 2019, it started to take off. And I was glad because we had 3 years of experience and processes and understanding it, and we were ready to scale at that point. COVID was, I always say, as Winston Churchill said, this is our finest hour. I look at COVID was our finest hour, because we had this remote team. They all worked hard because things really started to explode through there, and that's really where we started to scale. So I always look at that and say it was evolutionary, not revolutionary, and I was smart enough to know right answer when told.
I love that, because what you were able to do is you took the infamous Black Swan event, and instead of it being a crisis, you flipped it to an opportunity to accelerate growth of the business. And that's huge. And truthfully, there's some of the groundwork that you laid, and people talk about luck and all that stuff, but luck is what you create, blah, 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 all that, right? We don't want to, I can go down that rabbit hole for another hour. But the thing is, you saw this, and you went, well, that door's cracked a little bit right now. I think I'm going to put my foot right square in the middle of it and slam it open. Did you feel that way? I mean, when pandemic, 2 weeks to get back to normal, all those things happened. How did you react to that, or was it organic?
I think if I look back on it, I like being a wartime leader, not a peacetime leader, right? When there's a crisis or something's on fire, then that's the time I want to lead, right? When everything's quiet, it gets boring, right? So I looked at this, and when COVID hit, we probably lost 20% of our clients within 72 hours, right? And I understand business was tight for them. They pulled their money back. Even though we had contracts, I'm like, that's fine, right? But we had a lot of larger corporate companies that we've been talking to for a while. They had this marketing budget. They had a travel budget. They had a convention budget that they weren't using. And they're like, we still need to get out to our clients. So we started to talk about them on how they could redeploy that, right? So it was more, how can we help these people? And then go into our team also. When we had so many people were getting laid off and everything, I went to our team and like, okay, I know your kids are home right now, right? But as we ramp up here, could you give us some more hours? And to a person, everyone said, I don't know how, but I know I will do it. So, they took on extra hours so we could help all of these people while we were hiring new people. So once again, I don't know if it was, being so smart or just listening to what the clients were saying, right? I'd like to tell you the story was, I had this great plan. It's like the business plan. I always say the best piece of fiction I've ever read or written is my business plan. It was beautiful. Every graph went up and to the right. But really, it's just like listening to the market, listening to our team, and all pulling together on that.
Talking about the corporations, coming with the budget there, and what that drives me to is something I think is a really interesting perspective. Talking about podcasting, which is because of everything we had talked about earlier, the conversational aspect. To take the very easy example of Tom, if you going on a show talking about everything that you've learned, talking about Interview Valet, so someone goes, "Oh, I want to go work with Interview Valet." I think the other interesting piece of it is because podcasts are so niche. And it's so specific to a group of people that you can market to a group of people much better. The example that comes to mind for this, I read this article, it would have been about a year ago, but it was about selling to women, and that these marketers had not found a way for years of getting their products in front of women. And then this surge of podcasts came, and they said, "Oh, wow, 10 million women listen to this one podcast every single week," and they started throwing all their money at it. And I think it's a really interesting thing to where it's you could find these groups of people that are committing to listening to a certain type of thing, so they're in the same subject area, and if you're able to tie your product into that, it fits right in. I heard somebody on a podcast once talking about what makes it so different, and it's because, and the irony is, I'm listening to this, and he says it's because I'm in some guy's ears, just talking in his ears for 5 hours a week. You don't have that relationship with that many people. So when I tell you to go try Manscaped or BetterHelp or whatever, insert all of these ones that are on every podcast, you take it because you go, "Hey, Camden said that. And he's the guy in my ears all the time like that." And I think there's an interesting piece there. But I think what I want to ask you, Tom, is then how do you think that changes as we move forward? Because we to me, it's the market was built there. I think there was a recognition of the market, probably, around COVID mostly. And then now we're kind of in probably a little bit more of the oversaturated side. So where would you say it's going from there, from the marketing perspective?
I agree with you that it's a great way to target, right? And there's a reason I'm on this podcast that talks to business owners and not on that female health and beauty fashion one, right?
Right.
I would push back a little bit about the oversaturated, right?
Okay.
If you, depending what data you look at, there's somewhere between 3 and 4 million podcasts, right? But only less than 400,000 have gone live or posted in the last 30 days, right? So it's very easy to start one, hard to keep it going. And I think as other content gets so noisy that audio or audio and video is going to stand out so much more. So here we are in 2023 talking about this. I'm really questioning, is there a future for SEO and printed content, right? Because if I can make it on Chat GPT, what used to take me an hour to write a blog, now I can get 100 blogs in that same hour and post them. Well, it's just going to get so saturated, and the quality is going to go down. And then they're going to say, "Well, was that really Tom's blog, or was that Chat GPT?" Right? If there was misspellings in it, it was my blog, or grammatical errors. So I think those other ones are going to get noisier. I think the conversations are going to get more powerful. Right? You think about. How many ads do we listen to every day and we stop listening to them? Or the billboards we drive by and we never see because we just block them out. Even sometimes on ads, I wonder if placed ads in podcasts are going to be as effective, right? We've all got that button that says fast forward 10 seconds or, Overcast, what I use for when I listen. There's certain podcasts I know the first 60 seconds are ads. Yep. So I have it start at the 60-second point, right? So I'm not sure that they're as powerful in there. I think the ones that are host read throughout there become more powerful. Like, because you said, wow, Cam and Otis told me about this, right? That's more powerful than, and now let's go, to our sponsors. I think that's important. And also for the company to be out there talking. Right? Because people buy from people, and especially for higher level things, right? So I want to know what the culture is, why they started it, And I'll give you an example of this. Early on, we worked with a guy by the name of Gavin Zaklinski. He started Acuity Scheduling, which was the first acquisition of Squarespace. And talking with him, he said he feels that his marketing efforts and how he built it through podcast interviews made him more valuable than other ones like Calendly or Schedule Once or all the rest of that. Because, let's be honest, they all did about the same. Right? But I heard Gavin on how he built it for his mom, why he built it, how his team was all based in the U.S. And it was sort of that culture in it, right? And the other ones, I don't know, are they out of Bangladesh or what we'd say Timbuktu or whatever? I don't know. But it's like, yeah, I know Gavin. I like him. I'm going to stay with him. So his churn rate was less than that. And I think you're not going to be able to do that. You look at the old Harry's razors. Remember when that video came out? What's the difference between Harry's and Gillette and all the rest of that? I don't know that there's a quality difference, but I like that guy, right? He's funny. I know who the owner of the company is. I think that kind of relationship is getting more and more powerful. So I think doing that through media is going to be easier on things like, long form videos, long form interviews, things like that. So I think the heyday of podcasting, I think, is still ahead of us.
And I think to add on to that, I think it really plays into what we have right now to call it like the celebrity, like rock star CEO that we see with like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. So it's like everyone seems to like really be playing into that. And even for a smaller company, it kind of trains the customer to look for that. Of like, even though I know that, the guy selling me t-shirts up the road, shout out to Anthony Spencer, coach rugby with him, great t-shirts, Vivid t-shirts, Vista t-shirts, but even though he's not Elon Musk, he's not this, it's still, that's Anthony. I know Anthony. I know him. And it's like, it still just creates that, even on a local level, just here for Tucson, it's like, no, that's the t-shirt guy. And it starts to build that rapport, exactly to your point. I think that's a really interesting thing to see it keep moving forward like that on the smaller scale for the businesses.
Well, and speaking of that scale, one of the things that I'd love to hear more about is, as you scaled and you mentioned 30 of your team members in Europe, how have you managed to establish and sustain a culture in a completely dispersed organization?
Very painfully. And I'll be honest with this, right? Sometimes I have to relearn lessons. So early on, we'd scale up, and all of a sudden we got to be, we were probably 22 people or so. And, we do great team building. We've got a great team, right? We get on Zoom calls together. They work together. It seems like always somebody's online to do chats. And so if somebody's got a question, somebody else is there. I have always looked at a servant leadership thing. So even though I wasn't meeting the people in real life, I reach out to them. I cared about them as people, especially with military spouses, right? Just talking with them and saying, yeah, your spouse is going on deployment. Yeah, take some time off, and now they're on deployment. Sure, you can have extra hours, right? With that. But when all of a sudden we hit that tipping point, it was right around 24, maybe 2024. It seemed like we had so many people and it was getting so complex. And for a while I was beating my head against the wall, and then I'm like, what does the military do in things like this? It's right. You don't have a squad of 100 people. I'm like, we got to break it down, right? And so it was painful. But I said, we're going to break it down into pods, right? And we're going to have a pod that's in charge of business, one that's in charge of, real estate and investing, another one's that's health, nutrition, and wellness. So we're going to break it up as sort of mini companies inside there. And then I'm going to take, some of the people that are up and coming leaders, right? And say, can you be the player coach in here? Can you be the captain? I'll mentor you. I'll help you with all of that. And that worked so well, right? And now I'm almost at that point where, where somebody says something about your kid and you're like, well, I didn't even know that, but thank you. I'm so proud. That's where I am. And my goal now in it is really to support the team, especially support and develop the leaders in that, and to support the next generation of leaders. That's where I'm spending most of my time. One of the things you'll see CEO in my title, but I'm very quick to say it's Chief Evangelist Officer, right? I am not the CEO that deals with Wall Street and investors and everything. No, I'm out there evangelizing for the market, for our clients, and for our team, right? And so it's been fun. It's been a more rewarding leadership experience in the last 2 years than I've ever had. And that goes back even to, leading in the military.
Could you share just one literal tactic to help some other folks out? Because I think a lot of people really struggle with building the culture and building that rapport with their teams, working remotely. Could you just share one tactic for that?
Yeah. Be honest, be real, be vulnerable, right? Early on, somebody pointed out to me that nothing will ruin a relationship more with your spouse, your God, your relatives and friends, or your team quicker than pretending like you're perfect, right? Because they all know you're not, and they're just going to stand back and watch you do that, and watch you figure it out. So I try being real and authentic, right? And say, take to the leadership team, we got this problem. I don't know what's causing it or how we're going to fix it, but you're closer to it. I know you can do it. The other thing is my team knows that if they get an email from me and it doesn't have a grammatical or spelling error, it's a phishing thing. Don't respond to it. So I'm great at videos, right? And I'll just jump up. I do one every Monday morning that's called the Weekly Wrap-Up. And most of the time I'll run outside, and have something in the background and just say, hey, here's what happened last week, the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm looking forward to our, all hands call on Thursday. Or I do a lot of those Loom videos just to share up-to-date information. Share wins, right? And then also being very transparent. We were talking about the recession, I don't know, probably 6 months ago, right? And I wanted them to hear it from me before they heard it on the news, that tough times were coming. This is what we're doing. This is what we're getting ready for. And we've always done the best, when there's tough times. So trying to be forward with them. Another great example, and I know you asked for one and I've given you like four, was, remember that weekend when it was like, is SVB going to melt down the entire banking system? We get paid on Monday. I pay my people quickly for the job they do, and we typically get paid on Monday, right? So as I'm hearing this over the weekend, is this all going to melt down and everything? Called people and said, listen, we've got plenty of money in the bank, right? We're going to be okay. We're below that limit. And, oh, by the way, when we first started out, everybody got paid, the independent contractors, by PayPal. I said, I just moved enough money into PayPal to pay everybody for 3 weeks. So even if we have to go back to the old thing of PayPal, we're okay. There were people that had no idea what I was talking about. It's like, what the heck is SVB? But the people, well, everybody, the ones that didn't understand it or weren't aware of it, and the ones that were, they were glad that I was worried about that over a weekend so they didn't have to be.
One piece there that I think is really interesting is the balance of being able to share those things and be honest with folks, and then also keeping some stuff close enough to the chest that, not everyone's running around with their hair on fire because you said something that may or may not come true. So I want to give you a chance to get into that speculative area a little bit here, which is the future of podcasting just broadly. We talked about audio and video. We've seen things going more and more towards the video side over the last few years. Where do you see it going in the future? Feel free to have fun with the speculation. Nobody from Interview Valet is listening.
And this isn't being recorded, right? So
No, not at all. Not at all.
I can make any predictions here. History repeats itself, right? And I remember a few years ago, I was at a conference at Harvard. I got actually invited to speak at this conference, and they did it on podcasting. And there was a person that was much, much smarter than me that talked about the similarities between radio and podcasting, right? And I guess in 1920, radio was called wireless internet, right? Because it made sense. It's wireless internet. By 1930, it was radio. And their thought was that podcasting started as podcast because it's the iPod, right? And I remember asking my youngest daughters, what's the pod stand for in podcast? They rolled their eyes and they're like, I don't know, Dad. What's it stand for? They never knew a world with an iPod. So I think we're evolving, right? And somebody that's listening to this in 2030 is laughing every time we say podcast, right? I think it's going to be called something different, and I think it's evolving too, right? Podcast used to mean audio only. Oh, we're recording video here, right? If somebody sees this on YouTube, is it a podcast? If somebody hears this on XM radio, when it gets picked up and rebroadcast, is that still a podcast? When it's transcribed and somebody that is vision impaired and hearing impaired, gets this through Braille or whatever, is that still a podcast? I don't know. I don't care, right? The biggest thing is I think there's a lot of problems in the world today, but there's no better time to be alive or to be a business owner, because we can create in the way that is the easiest way for us. And for me, that's audio and interviews like this. And it can be repurposed into ways that are easy for customers, right? Not everybody listens to audio, but you can get the transcript, you can do blogs and stuff like that. So I think all of this is merging, right? What's television today? Is Netflix television? What's a movie? If a movie is released and I see it on Netflix, is it still a movie? Everything is sort of merging, and it's just sort of becoming content and conversations.
Yeah, that's so true, and I think you hit the nail on the head, though. In 7 years or 10 years or whatever, when we look back, it'll be, oh, so that's where it came from, kind of thing. Because going forward, when you're in it, you don't see it, and you're living it day in, day out. You don't see those differences, but the difference that you make is how you set yourself up going forward. And one of my favorite phrases a friend taught me a while back is, my past can be a schoolhouse or a prison. And with that in mind, thinking about, I'm much more looking at my past as a schoolhouse. And what I learned today in my schoolhouse hanging out with you was a great reminder. I have that same genetic default, I like to call it, of I like to be in charge when the shit hits the fan. Oh man, I love it. Crisis, people running around with putting lighter fluid on their hair, getting ready to run up and down the hallway saying the sky is falling. Man, I love those situations, because I just walk through it. While they're running, I'm walking through it, and I'm seeing solutions, and all they're seeing is red and panic. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I love managing chaos. That is, it just gets me. I'm getting chills on my back right now thinking about those opportunities. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
A lot, but the thing that comes to mind as I was looking back at my notes is, when y'all were talking about perspective, being out in the ocean, being on top of the mountain, and we started talking about like the impact. It made me think of a piece of perspective that I have that I don't think I'd really thought about from the agriculture, which is the amount of effort it goes into growing something to feed somebody for one meal, and then talking with people like Dr. Quello, and then talking about feeding the 10 billion people that are coming, and just the perspective of the huge problem and the amount of effort that goes into each little piece of it, but then still having that fire to keep moving forward and solving it. And that, even if you're just feeding one person, it's still an amazing thing. Now, we like to feed 10 billion, but it's, it's the scale of the problem, but then also how important the small piece of it is. So that's something I never really put that together. So thank you all for that when you're talking about mountains and boats or whatever that was.
Tom, how about you? What'd you learn?
Boy, you said something very early on, Otis, that haunted me this entire conversation. You talked about being selfish if you don't share that with you. And I was just like, that is so true, right? I believe we're blessed to be a blessing, right? The people that taught me something, it wasn't for me. It was so that I could pass that on. And as you were talking about that, the vision that came to my mind was, being up at the pearly gates and, being asked, I gave you all of these things. I taught you all of these things. Why were you so selfish not to share that with someone else? And, how can I say, well, there's nobody else around me to share it with. It's like, and then I gave you the internet. So it's like, you're not only selfish, but you're stupid. So that really struck me in that it's not just impact for impact's sake. It's not just impact for my sake, but it's to help other people, right? And not to do that on my part is selfish, right? So thank you for sharing that early on and giving me something that's going to haunt me for the week.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I could help out. How do folks follow you, learn more about what you're doing, check out and hire into Interview Valet?
Yeah, so the best place is just make it easy. I know you're multitasking, doing all the rest of this. Just go to interviewvalet with a V.com. So interviewvalet.com/COS. for Camden and Otis, or COS, Camden and Otis Show, right? I told you there'd be typos. And I have all my contact information, free copy of my book, Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with the Targeted Interview Strategy. And if it makes sense to jump on a call to see how you could leverage targeted podcast interviews to grow your brand, grow your business, make a bigger impact, I'll put all that there too. So just go back to interviewvalet.com/COS.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. Folks, that's the guy that you go to the fancy restaurant and he takes the keys from you and parks your car. That kind of valet. All right? Think about it in that one. All right? I just want to emphasize that. Tom, man, it has been a pleasure to hang out with you today. I've truly enjoyed our time with you.
Thank you both. A lot of people say doing a podcast is easy. The great ones just make it look easy. I know all the work that goes into this, and I appreciate all you both do.
Awesome, man. Thanks. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Tom Schwab, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam and Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And while you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button too. As always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.